and thank you very much for your patience, everybody. So a big welcome. My name's Gillian Jones. I'm the Managing Director of Emerge Development Consultancy, and what I'm going to talk to you about this afternoon is how to create a coaching culture. This has been the subject of the book that I published last year, and I'm going to share with you some case studies, some tips, and I'm going to demonstrate how you can actually start to work towards a coaching culture in your organisation. Okay. So first of all, thinking about your organisation, here are some things which all organisations seem to strive for: how to empower their people, how to get maximum engagement, and how to get enthusiasm from their people. And these are all components of a coaching culture. So these are the things that we're searching for when we start to look at creating a coaching culture. So let's have a look to start with at some of the benefits of a coaching culture. When you have a culture, when everybody is wanting to learn from each other and people feel empowered, what they're doing is they're spending their time trying to improve the organisation, improve their role, and collaborate with others, rather than to just get around the system, which is the issue that we have when we have an autocratic type of culture. So what you will expect when this is happening is to have increased productivity, certainly people looking at how they can improve the organisation, a lot more creativity and innovation, staff retention because the engagement helps them to keep there more, a reduction in absenteeism because when people don't feel they're being controlled in such a way, they tend to want to turn up for work, and clearly continuous improvement there. And I'm sure those of you listening will be looking for some of those things in your organisations. Other benefits, morale does improve because when people feel they're continually developing themselves and getting their craft increased, then they do tend to feel much more enthusiastic about their role. One of the really important things in a learning environment is that an organisation tends to create a really good solid knowledge strategy. And in organisations where you have stakeholders, you have complex work, you have ambiguity and things changing, it's really, really important that knowledge is shared and there is no sort of single point of failure in the organisation. Ironically, having a coaching culture will also mean that you are decreasing your costs, because it doesn't mean that all of your money needs to be spent on training budget. And you can get very, very creative about the way in which you can deliver your coaching. And it helps people to change behaviour, particularly when you can encourage peer coaching and people can look at other people and start to coach them as they see behaviour in action. I'm sure that many of you are in organisations which are constantly changing at the moment. From my perspective, I notice that it's the only thing that seems to be happening at the moment, and that change is now continuous, and that's how organisations tend to exist. And that's another reason why it's important that the workforce is agile. And we've mentioned knowledge retention. So let's have a look at some of the things which are really, really important. I'm going to talk through why we empower people, what's the issue with engaging people in change, the 8 C's of engagement, which is a model that we've looked at to help a coaching culture, some definitions, and of course, where would you start? And then I'd like to take you through some case studies and finish off by leaving you with some tips. One of the real things that I find people get stuck on within coaching culture, or within utilising coaching in their organisation at all, seems to be how to measure ROI. It seems to be much simpler in organisations when they're delivering training. So in our book, we did a lot of work at looking at how could you actually measure coaching and how to measure return on investment. So we'll have a quick look at some of those tips. Okay, so hope you're all ready and sitting comfortably. So looking at this research, it was really interesting to see the difference between staff who are engaged and staff who are disengaged. And if someone believes that they can positively impact the quality of their organisation's products or affect their service or impact their role, clearly you have got a whole load of individuals who are working towards helping you to achieve their vision. The figures which relate to staff who are disengaged are actually quite shocking, so you can see the difference here. So having a look at this model here, and this is a model for you to consider, I suppose, what you are doing in any of these boxes here, and also what your managers are encouraged to do within them. Because to get people engaged, they need some of all of this. First of all, they need to feel confident about what they're doing, not just about their skills, but they need to feel confident that they will be supported and they have the right authority to make a decision. And if they make a decision, they have the confidence that you'll support them. They need to be adequately challenged, and that challenge needs to feel as if it goes along with the right amount of support. And this is very individual for people to try and find what measure of challenge and support really encourages them to want to succeed. Clearly, they need to have the right competence and they need to know that they're constantly being developed to be competent to do their role. And working down the right-hand side of the model, they also need to have a connection with what they're doing. If they can understand how what they're working on connects to the bigger picture, then they become much more engaged with what they're doing. We work a lot with people in the defence industry and big project management organisations where people are working on small parts, for example, of a communication system for a submarine. And often they can forget the bigger picture, and it's important sometimes for them to actually see what will happen to it. I think the majority of people have the urge to be creative in their role, and that comes in degrees. But to know that there is an opportunity to be creative, might not be creative about how they do something, but certainly creative about what they do. And they do also need some control. As human beings, one of our biggest urges is for control. And collaboration, there is nothing worse for people when they work in a toxic team or a team that's not sharing knowledge or engaging with each other, or within an organisation where teams seem to be fighting with each other and collaborative intelligence isn't employed. So that's another critical factor. And finally, credibility, both credibility of the organisation and their own personal credibility. And when all of these things are put together, as you can see in the jigsaw, this is really when people tend to feel engaged. And the missing part of the jigsaw in the middle is that coaching touches every single part of these. So they're a big part of getting people engaged through a coaching culture. Okay, so we talked earlier about the 3 E's. And the links to a coaching culture really are very, very critical. When organizers change, there are some things which they have to take into account. So, for example, we know many organizations who have to restructure and cut headcount. And when they do that, they often forget that the skills that they are leaving, that are losing when people leave, mean that the organisation isn't necessarily fit for purpose. So when organisations are going through a restructure, sometimes what happens is the focus is very much on getting through, doing what needs to be done, particularly in the HR environment where it's a big job. And sometimes the people factor is something that they feel they'll start working on once all the restructuring is done and people are in the right positions. However, it's really, really important that people are still receiving development and understanding what will happen wherever they can during a restructure. And we call focusing on survivors, i.e. people who are still there through restructures, is absolutely vital. And maintaining that even if you are restructuring and things that are happening, that people still feel they're working for a successful organisation, and ensuring that they can still display confidence and competence even if they are in a situation where uncertainty is hitting them. This model here is a model by Tosti and Jackson, and this model shows that when an organisation tries to achieve a vision, it's critical that there are certain things in place. Now, I'm sure that when you look at this model, you will recognise that your organisation spends a significant amount of time looking at the strategies, the goals, the targets, and the objectives that link to those goals and targets and strategies in order to achieve those tasks. And providing that's all aligned and it works, then they will get the outcomes and the success that they desire. However, I'm sure you've already gathered that there's another part to this diagram, and as you can see on the other side, it's how we do it. And this links to the values that the organisation display, the competences and the behaviours. And this is where coaching culture really, really sits. Now, I know many organisations who have spent significant time working on developing values that will support them. And then what happens is those values are perhaps put on a nice drawing or some company literature, but people in the organisation actually don't connect to them in a way that makes them want to display the behaviour that will help the organisation to succeed. And obviously, when an organisation has defined values, they've defined them for a reason, and that reason is that they need people to behave in this way in order to achieve the goals and targets. So having the right culture is really, really important. And a coaching culture is one whereby people are happy to receive feedback on whether they're living the values and the behaviours, and are happy to be able to receive constructive information about what they might do differently. In our experience, most organisations spend more time on the what we do side of the alignment model and significantly less time on the other side, but it would be interesting for you to consider that, and perhaps we can talk about that when we go into question time afterwards. So organisational change versus culture change is something else to have a think about. If you have got change going on and you're going through that, as we said, it's really important to focus on the people, and it is a priority to really ensure that you're constantly embedding a culture. In my experience, embedding a new culture can take up to 3 years. Of course, you will get immediate changes, but to really, really have it embedded will take 3 years. And it's a bit like gardening, really. Once you start, you have to keep embedding it and keep working on it. However, the benefits are huge. So how do we do this? Here are some of the things on this slide which are really, really important. Some of them sound simple, but in my experience, managers are not great at doing these. Managers might be good at telling people what training courses they need to attend, but not necessarily great at truly finding out what people need to succeed in their role, asking the right questions, probing down, and dealing with the real issue rather than just the stated issue. We've talked about making sure that behaviours are embedded, but it's also important that managers understand their role in helping people to understand what behaviours will be seen if they're living a value. Also, we need to make sure that we're offering a variety of ways for people to develop rather than simply offering them a training calendar. And I know many of you, I'm sure, will be looking at different ways to do this. And that really means being able to provide some just-in-time learning. If somebody is nominated to go on a negotiation skills course, which is running next April, that they're doing negotiation on a day-to-day basis, what can we do to help them in the here and now? And again, that's a component of a learning culture. Also, making sure that managers are great at catching people doing it exactly right and telling them when they are getting things right and they are working well. And also making sure that there is a free sharing of skills, new knowledge, new experiences, lessons learned from mistakes, and that people are constantly working on this. So, a coaching culture is one where people are empowered, they want to learn from their successes, and also that managers feel responsible for their people's performance. Now, I don't know whether this is the case for you, but what's interesting is that often when we train managers how to coach people, at the end of the day, they will say, well, this is all very interesting, but when do we do it? So I ask people, well, what's the it? And they say, well, you know, finding the time to spend an hour coaching people. And what it sounds like is that they have a very busy and important job to do, and somebody has given them a side order of people to manage, which have nothing to do with their job. And of course, we know that a manager's job is to get things done through their people. So what we need to do is to help them to make those connections, which really make them understand that they need to be more transformational, and that coaching is a big part of being transformational. And as I mentioned before, that people are using all of their energy to improve the organisation and not to try and get around the system. Okay, I hope you're still there. Let's talk about some of the problems, because we can't just brush over them. There are quite a few problems to implementing a coaching culture. First of all, it does take a considerable amount of planning. And it's not always comfortable for an organisation if they have a style which is very much a telling style of management. It can be quite difficult for managers to be able to change that style. Sometimes, particularly if an organisation is going through considerable change, time is an issue, and perhaps managers don't feel equipped. So although we're talking about a coaching culture which involves a variety of ways of training people, that training, it can be important to them to start them off, i.e. to really understand what coaching is and to give them those skills. Sometimes it's easier because people think that they'll have to be more accountable in coaching culture, which is true. And again, we mentioned that evaluation can be difficult. If you're an HR person too, you may have experienced this one here, not having board support. Sometimes mentioning the words coaching culture can actually send a board into a, oh, well, here goes HR with their pink and fluffy type of ideas again. So we have to be very, very careful how we sell this concept. A real coaching culture will offer good bottom line results, and we have to make sure they understand that. Now, on the screen in front of you, you're going to see a big wheel here, and I just want to introduce you to this, and this is one of the models from our books which looked at coaching culture and the layers which are important to consider. Now, the reason I want to show you this is so that you can start considering what areas of this have you already made some inroads into your organisation. Because when we go into organisations to help them to implement a coaching culture, no organisation is the same in their needs. Everybody will have a different level of maturity in some of these things here. So if you'd like to start in the centre of this, we've already talked about the importance of a vision. But actually, an organisation also needs to have the people vision, which is around wanting to have this culture and understanding what it would look like. There is a slight issue here, though. You might not want to call it a coaching culture. There are many different names for it, and people might hear the name and be turned off. could be a culture of performance, so there could be lots of other ways to say it. If you move out from the red into the next layer here are the other things that are important. Having a strategy for implementing your coaching culture, which is very clear and integrates everything that every member of the HR team is doing. Clearly getting your objectives and measurement up front, and knowing how you will be able to prove that it is working. You can do this perhaps by a coaching scorecard, or some of you may be using a balanced scorecard, in which case this can very much integrate into the people section. And in the sort of piece that goes out from the side, on the left-hand side of the screen, these are the context of these areas. So that's all about the mission in the green. The next layer out is about what resources you have. As we said, do you have board support? Maybe even just one champion or somebody who wants to do this. If the CEO or the MD is a believer in it, then that makes it much, much easier. Are you able to look at your internal capability? And that means your managers, that means your HR people, and that means people like mentors, and whether you have a mentoring program, and how you can link this to coaching culture strategy. Often HR people are the last people to get development, and it's important that they model this. So when managers call them, they're not constantly telling them what they should be doing, but coaching them to take greater responsibility for their people. Also looking at external capability. Do you use executive coaches? We're great believers that executive coaching has its place, but it's very, very important that the executive coaching offering is looked at to ensure that the right coaches are being used at the right time, that HR and managers are being involved in this to make sure that there is a strong process. And it isn't simply about people just having somebody that they go to lunch with occasionally. There's a lot of rationalisation which needs to go around executive coaching to make sure that you're really maximising your costs from it. It is an expensive business, but it's also very, very useful for achieving fast results, and particularly with senior people, where it's less likely that they will be going on training courses, which potentially they might have needed to go on years ago, but it never happened for them. Then we have some indicators in the next circle to tell us whether this is working or not. So in the blue circle, we're looking at what are the values and beliefs of the organisation. Do the organisation believe that you can be empowered, or are they so used to being told what to do? It's going to take a while to crack this. Do you have any knowledge management strategy? What are you doing to make sure that lessons learned are happening and shared and that people work together? What does happen to embed the right behaviours in the organisation? And finally, how can you use coaching culture to touch every part of the employee life cycle, from induction and onboarding right through to the performance development, the way that development needs are identified. Are coaching needs identified there, or is it just training needs? Right through to people returning to work, people studying, and all sorts of other opportunities. And then finally, on the outside, it's again about the culture, how much it aligns to the organisational strategy, how we can persuade the board that it helps to show high performance, what development's offered, how the organisation implements continuous improvement strategies, and how much support and challenge you're prepared to give your people. As I mentioned, the employee cycle, here's a pictorial of it. So as you can see, there are lots of points during this where you can actually touch it with coaching culture, including exits. So that's why we made the cycle an iterative cycle, because clearly if people are exiting, then during exit interviews, information that is being gathered, particularly where it's about team working or managers' performance, should be fed back in a coaching way to ensure that new starters don't have the next experience. So again, when you look at coaching culture strategy, one of the first things that you should be looking at is having a workshop with HR and any L&D people to look at what sort of initiatives are actually being put in at the moment where you could work on coaching culture strategy. So where do we start? Given you a lot of information already, it sounds huge. If you're on the first steps of this journey, you may at this point feeling slightly overwhelmed. If you're further along it and you may have bumped into some obstacles, you can see my slide here says Big Bang or stealth. And what we mean here is, do you actually start by trying to get the board to support this and to roll it out as an initiative, which would be the Big Bang approach? Or do you find an opportunity to take it to an area whereby the organisation may have a place which is already a centre of excellence which could be improved, where you have managers who are already good at coaching and could be have their coaching increased, or an area which is underperforming, and by implementing it, you could demonstrate the improvements that could come from starting to implement coaching culture. So you could choose either of these opportunities. What I'd like to do now is I'd like to just show you what some other people have done, and these case studies come from a book. So there are some case studies here that we can start to take a look at, and these case studies will help you to see how organisations have embraced it. One of these will be very familiar to you in the UAE, and that's National Bank of Abu Dhabi, so let's start with them. Now, in the National Bank of Abu Dhabi, as with many other banks in the UAE, and certainly the UK has been through this as well, what we have is banks going from a service to sales transformation. And when the National Bank of Abu Dhabi started to go through all this, they recognised that they really needed to do some significant work, particularly with their branch managers, to help them to achieve this. So what they did, and I'll be showing you a big diagram in the moment with a lot of information on, so I'll just highlight to you now the important part. They decided to run a 3-level program and to put all of their managers through some development. And there were various types of development, both leadership and technical. But it was all underpinned by coaching. Now, this was quite revolutionary because they decided to do a certified program, which meant that every bank manager had to attend all of the programs and had to be assessed and pass each one before they could move on to the next one. And it also impacted on how they were promoted. It was called Al-Manara. So on the first level, when they went through a coaching program, they had to do the coaching training, they had to go back to their branches, they had to practice it, and then come back and do an assessment day. And if they didn't pass the assessment, which was very, very robust, they would have to come back until they did. They showed a lot of increases in their customer surveys, in their sales as well, so they were able to measure this quite clearly. They also decided to implement qualifications, so for their managers they started to roll out ILM, which is the Institute of Leadership and Management, level 3 in coaching, so that they had some good qualified coaches internally, and implemented a mentoring program. They started with what they called their ASAC students, which were the students they took in and trained and placed internally, and then rolled it out to other people in the organisation. They also had a programme which we designed for them, which was called the Ideas Programme. Now, this was rolled out to senior leaders, not just in the retail banking, but across the whole of the bank. And it was a programme where they came for 2 days to identify how they were cascading the vision of the department. They undertook a Coaching 360 survey. They wrote a vision for their departments, and they looked at who they needed to develop and who they needed to coach, and then they received external executive coaching for 3 months so that they could deliver a 90-day action plan. So it was a very, very robust programme with a lot of measurement attached to that as well. So here's a big diagram that you can see, and where I'm going to direct you to look is the third column along, which says certification programme. You'll see underneath that 3 different programmes, and this is the programmes that were implemented for coaching, so this is just a section of it. And you can see what was put into that. So at level 1, everybody had to look at how do we coach people to be creative, and how do we really teach people the skills and the basics of coaching. Then they went on to level 2, and they looked at a programme which was around their competencies, and we taught them how to coach using the competency framework. So you'll see how that helped to really, really embed values and behaviours. And then at level 3, it was for people who were going to go on almost to be CEOs. It was a branch manager at CEO, and whether they were really and truly building a coaching culture. So sorry, that's a bit of a big diagram, but those are the key things I wanted you to see. All right, something very, very different. You may not have heard of Yum, but I know you will have heard of Kentucky Fried Chicken and Pizza Hut, and Yum is the holding company. Now, Yum have always been very, very keen on training and coaching, and I think they lead the way. And what we did is, a few years ago, we actually got their most senior people, and we trained them how to coach, and they themselves went out and trained everybody else in coaching and cascaded it all to their direct reports, which I thought was fantastic because they really were walking the talk. They built coaching into their success routines. Now, their success routines would be things like standard things they had to do in their restaurants, coating chicken, cooking things, which at first glance looked like they might just be a tell session with the manager telling the person how to do it. But they changed it to make it feel like a coaching program. One of their competencies is coaching, and it's part of their competency framework. And if they didn't score highly on coaching, there was no career progress for them. But even more interestingly, they called all their area managers and regional managers area coaches and regional coaches. So they demonstrated all along that's what was happening. Phase 2 at the moment, we're working with them to turn their restaurant general managers into coaching, and again delivering a programme across the whole of them so that every RGM is experienced in coaching. Number 3, now this is investors in people. So this was a particularly interesting case study for me. I don't know whether you have a similar thing in the UAE, but in the UK and in Scotland, this is a standard which organisations are assessed against to see whether they are really investing in their people, exactly as it is. So I decided to do a case study on the organisation who delivered this. And it was good to see that they did practice what they preach. But they were very honest, and they said, actually, we really did have quite a directive culture, so it was quite hard for us to move to a coaching approach. So they launched it with a program on coaching culture. They actually went for a big bang approach and really talked to people about changing their mindset. And they really worked on less structure than I just demonstrated to you in the National Bank of Abu Dhabi. They worked on a very fluid coaching approach. They thought they would start with simply getting people to listen out for questions, which meant that people wanted coaching, such as, I'm a bit nervous about doing this, or I'd like some help with this, or what can I do? So that was slightly different. And finally, British Airways, again, you'll all have heard of British Airways. And they, again, have a very, very strong bias towards coaching. And the good practice that I noticed from them was that they managed to get a good balance between using internal coaches and external coaches. But they worked very, very hard to have an accredited internal coaching pool, which is something that a lot of organisations have. The BBC also has that. And we do work with a lot of organisations to implement this. Something to really think about, because it's very cost effective, and particularly for middle managers and new managers can be great support. They have a really robust internal supervision and support network, which means that they regularly have sessions for their internal coaches to come and upskill themselves. And then what they're looking at is now externally networking with other organisations who have coaching pools to see if they can share coaches. This is a more difficult scheme to get off the ground, because obviously there's confidentiality and time off and things like that. But I think, again, it was a very creative idea. Also, they're investing at the moment in colleague coaching. Now, one of the reasons this is very important, as you can imagine, is that when they are, for example, on the phones or when they're cabin crew, if somebody sees somebody behaving in a way which is not conducive to customer service, they need it dealt with immediately, so that, you know, if somebody's got 5 more hours in their flight, the person stops behaving in that way. So they started training colleagues on how to coach each other. So again, some very creative ways of doing that. Okay, so just a couple more slides. What can you do immediately? So what tips could you take away from today and start working on? Firstly, have a look at your performance management system. Does it really maximise coaching? Does it talk about coaching? Does it reinforce coaching? And does it ask managers to think about what sort of coaching their staff need as opposed to training? And make sure that when managers are writing development plans, they do cover all the opportunities, such as job shadowing, peer coaching, online, everything that you have. There's a whole variety. Have a look at your onboarding programme. One thing is induction, but onboarding plans should be really, really robust. They should probably last 3 months for new people, and should talk about who is going to coach them during those 3 months to get them up to speed as fast as possible. We mentioned the internal coaching pool, and we also talked about developing an internal knowledge management mindset framework. Ask your managers to have a look in their department and see where danger lies. If we lost certain people, what have they got in their head which could be an issue, and how can that knowledge be shared? Make sure that if anybody does go on training programs, they come back and they debrief other people around them, so it becomes normal to talk about sharing knowledge. Or perhaps get internal people to brief others on key topics and subjects that they're either expert in or that they've got new information on. Another thing which some of you might use, but I don't think it's used enough, is doing a skills matrices within a department, so that people know who's expert and it's public, and they know who they can go to find things from. And also, the last few years, we've done a huge amount of work on action learning sets within organisations, where people from different departments get together to work on one problem that an organisation might be affecting. So a few suggestions for you to get started. Okay. Some questions that you might consider in thinking about whether you want to implement a coaching culture are these. I wish I could hear you now to hear your answers, but yes, could your new starters be up and running? Do you sometimes feel you're not getting what you want from your people? Do managers need to delegate more? I can almost see you nodding as you read these. So if you have them in front of you, these are the reasons why you need to do this. So before I summarise, I don't have a slide here, but I promised you I would talk a little bit about measurement, and I do think that measurement is very, very important. Measurement only exists in coaching if you have a good process for identifying clear objectives at the beginning and ensuring that any coach or manager working with them makes sure that they document actions at the end of each coaching session and then they review them. So, for example, if you're using an external coach, that external coach should be constantly asking the person, what have you done since our last session? What impact has that had on the organisation? And encouraging them to feed this back. A good coaching assignment will ensure that at some point the line manager is involved, and during that three-way meeting, it always should be a case that the person has prepared and will tell the manager what the impact the changes they've made in either behaviour or processes have made to the organisation. But one thing to really, really consider within coaching, because so much of it is behavioural, you may not necessarily be able to measure ROI in the same way, but consider ROE, which is return on expectation. When you did this coaching, you did it for a reason. What did you expect to happen, and has that actually happened? So just a few tips there. So in summary, we started by saying empowerment and engagement are key to bottom line improvements. Do make sure that whatever is going on in your organisation, you're working on change and culture at the same time, and that managers really understand that their responsibility is to manage through coaching. Have a look at improvements which really do increase your bottom line results, rather than just have a look at putting activities in, and consider the big bang versus stealth. Do have a look at the employee life cycle right from the beginning to the end, and as I said, return on investment is possible, but return on expectation will give you the full picture. So do remember, as I said, it is a long journey, it's not a destination, but the results that you get are absolutely huge. So that's the end of my presentation. I'd be delighted to take any questions from you.
Well, thank you very much, Ms. Jones, for your interesting presentation. Folks, once again, apologies for an earlier. While we were commencing the webinar, we encountered some problems, but I'm glad that we got over, and finally the webinar content was delivered by Ms. Jones. So if you have any questions, please insert the questions in the chat box or question box, or you could raise your hand. There is a hand icon available on the console, so if you click on it, you can even have an audio chat with Ms. Jones. Let me go to the first question in the box we have. Do you have to have the support of the senior team to be able to create a coaching culture?
It's a very
Ms. Jones, you there? I believe we lost you.